Welcome to the 2022-2023 Assessment Accessibility Training. This training was created by the Assessment Services team for site principals to present during staff PD, including opportunities in the fall. Please refer to this slide should you need to reach out to any of our team members. Our purpose for today is to ensure that you are equipped with the information and tools necessary to understand the significance of assessment accessibility, to know the available accessibility resources for the 2022-2023 school year for both CASP and LPAC, so you learn how to log into the Test Operations Management System, known as TOMS, so you can assign, collect, and enter designated supports and accommodations into TOMS, and leave with next steps to ensure the success of all students at your school. Throughout this presentation, we will be discussing the various assessments included in the California Assessment System, namely the CASP for English Language Arts and Literacy, or ELA, the CASP for Mathematics, the California Science Test, or CAST, the California Alternate Assessment, CAUS for ELA, Mathematics, and Science, and the California Spanish Assessment, or CSA. These four assessments all fall under the general category of CASP tests. Additionally, California also provides the LPAC. While not under the umbrella term of CASP, the LPAC is a vital part of California's assessment system. We may use one or more of these specific assessments during our discussion today as examples, but please keep in mind that all of these assessments play an important part in improving teaching and learning. Unless we note otherwise, the information and suggestions we provide for you apply to all of these assessments. Smarter Balance recognizes that the validity of these assessments results depend on each and every student being provided appropriate supports or resources as needed to help the student overcome barriers that may prevent an accurate demonstration of a student's skill and knowledge. Consider for a moment that in the 2019, more than half of all California students tested scored below standard for the ELA assessment, and about 60% scored below standard for the mathematics assessment. Think for a moment how these statewide numbers compare with our local students. While San Diego Unified fared slightly better than the average with only 47.7% for ELA and 59.8% for math, we can always improve. When you think about the students who have yet to score at or above standard, why might that be? Was it because they did not learn the skills and knowledge of their grade level standards? Or was it because they faced barriers that masked their performance on these assessments? These are questions to consider when analyzing student performance results on the LPAC and on all CASP assessments, including the CAST, the CSA, and even CA. These assessments strive to provide every student with a positive and productive assessment experience, generating results that are a fair and accurate estimate of each student's achievement. Further, the CASP and LPAC are built on a framework of accessibility for all students, including English learners, or ELs, students with disabilities, and ELs with disabilities. In the process of developing its next generation assessment to measure students' knowledge and skills as they progress toward college and career readiness, Smarter Balance and California recognize that the validity of assessment results depends on each and every student having appropriate accessibility resources when needed, based on the constructs being measured by the assessment. Let's begin by defining accessibility. Access and fairness are issues for all students when it comes to learning and testing. Students with specific learning needs may require accessibility resources during instruction and on assessments so they can validly demonstrate mastery of content. It is about ensuring all students have access. Some examples of this are test items that require extensive reading even when a construct being measured is not reading, or requiring students with fine motor difficulties to handwrite their answers to essay questions when keyboarding could just be easily used. Federal legislation defines and supports the application of universal design principles to improve fairness on all state and school district-wide achievement tests. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is a concept for designing products and services in such a way that they are usable by people with the widest possible range of functional capabilities, thus reducing the need for assistive technology or accommodations. An example of UDL applied to testing is allowing enough time for all students, including students with disabilities or learning needs. All students should have the time they need to complete each assessment. The CASP and LPAC were developed using the principles of UDL and with the recognition of the diverse characteristics and needs of students who participate in these assessments. To ensure that all students' accessibility needs are met, Smarter Balance created a series of accessibility resources based on the tenets of UDL. The resources are divided into 3 categories: universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. We will discuss these categories in greater detail in a moment. A primary purpose of the CASP and LPAC assessment is to improve everyday classroom teaching and learning. We want all students to have equal opportunities to access content material and to accurately demonstrate what they know and are able to do. By using the principles of UDL, the CASP and LPAC, including the alternate assessments, have included resources that address visual, auditory, and physical access barriers, allowing virtually all students to demonstrate what they know and what they can do. Smarter Balance provides accessibility resources for students that they can use during classroom instruction and on assessments. There is a wide range of instructional strategies, resources, and tools that can be used in daily instruction and on classroom assessments to help students access the intended and tested curriculum. Teachers can be flexible in the way they present content, the way students demonstrate learning, and the ways that they design student engagement activities. That flexibility does not always exist on a standardized test, such as the CASP and LPAC. While many allowable resources mirror those provided instructional tools, only resources that do not change the construct of the assessment item are available for use on the CASP testing. A major difference between how accessibility resources may be used in the classroom versus on the summative and interim CASP and on the initial and summative LPAC, as well as the CA. The use of approved accessibility resources for any CASP or LPAC assessment does not affect a student's score, nor does it count against the school district for its participation rate. To learn more about how the Smarter Balance system is accessible for students, visit the Smarter Balance accessibility note in the Padlet.
The next session we will be addressing is Assessment Accessibility Overview. As previously mentioned, there are 4 types of accessibility resources: universal tools for all students, designated supports, which any educator can recommend, accommodations, which must be noted in the current locked IEP of a student, and unlisted resources. Over the next few slides, we will be addressing each one of these individually. The statewide assessment system, TOMS, uses a multi-level approach to providing accessibility resources for students, similar to the MTSS, multi-tiered systems of supports framework that some of you may be familiar with and are already using in your schools. First, universal tools are practices, tools, and resources that have been added to our accessibility vocabulary and are available to all students on the basis of their individual choice and preference. They are similar to universal supports in the MTSS framework. Second, Designated supports are additional resources to support all students with a range of needs. They are similar to supplemental supports in the MTSS framework and are available to all students for whom a need has been identified by an adult who is familiar with the student's instructional needs. Finally, accommodations that have been available and used in both instruction and assessment for a number of years, and most of you are probably familiar with these as resources to support students with disabilities or students with individualized educational programs, or IEPs, and even Section 504 plans. They are similar to the intensified supports in the MTSS framework. It is important to remember that the use of approved accessibility resources does not affect the student's score. It is critically important that we ensure that each student has the opportunity to demonstrate their understanding of the content. Again, we need to know that what each student understands, not how well they physically can take an assessment. Accessibility resources. When do you use these resources? When a student is familiar with the accessibility resource and generally used during the school year. Accessibility resources are the same or similar to those used for instruction and classroom assessment. If a student has multiple opportunities to practice in the test environment, consider what this looks like in your school environment with one-on-one devices. Consistent use leads to familiar practice. Now that you understand the accessibility types, let's look a little more closely at the accessibility categories available on the CASP and LPAC so we can start thinking about how their use can help students overcome some of the learning barriers they may be facing. Resources included in the CASP and LPAC fall into these three basic categories based on the UDL. There are resources that support students to remain engaged with the assessment. For example, by providing breaks, a separate setting, or even noise buffers. There are also resources that support students by allowing them to respond through various actions and expressions, such as through an adaptive keyboard or by using a scribe. And finally, there are resources that support students by varying the way the assessment is presented. For example, all or parts of the assessment might be translated for an English learner, or the assessment might be read aloud to a struggling reader through text-to-speech. While not all student accessibility resources will transfer exactly as they might be provided in the classroom, the CASP and LPAC are understood to be the most forward-thinking in terms of accessibility resources provided to ensure student access. It is important to note that only resources that do not change the construct of the assessment item are available for use on the CASP and LPAC. A major difference between how accessibility resources may be used in the classroom versus on the CASP summative and interim assessments, as well as the initial and summative LPAC assessments. Most important for our discussion today, these resources are available to a broad range of students on the basis of identified student needs. Thinking about the nature of student needs can help determine which types of resources might be best to support them. As outlined on the previous slide, the three categories to determine appropriate support are engagement, action and expression, and presentation. Engagement is how do the students remain engaged with the task? Breaks, noise buffers, separate settings, and the ability to walk around. Action and expression are used by students being provided the opportunity to respond through various actions and expressions, such as using an adaptive keyboard, scribe, or speech to text. Presentation. Do you have students in your school that need information presented differently, such as translation, read aloud, or text to speech? Again, the purpose of accessibility is to know what each student understands, not how they physically take the assessments. Universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations all yield valid scores, so use them as your team sees fit. This is very important that you understand that these do not impact a child's score on any of the assessments given. Matrix 4, often referred to as the California Assessment Accessibility Resources Matrix. We will be going through what this matrix involves and includes, as well as an easier, also known as the bento box or graphic, for all of the different various accessibilities. As a simple outline, the Matrix 4 goes into great detail regarding all components of the CASP and LPAC, including English, Language, Arts, and Literacy, Mathematics, Science, the California Spanish Assessment, and the LPAC both computer and paper assessment.
We will now begin to address the available accessibility resources. Previously known as the bento box, we have included the accessibility resources graphics for LPAC and CASP. You will see that they look different than in previous years, but we are including the CASP ELA, Math, California Spanish Assessment, the CASP Science Assessment, the LPAC Assessment for computer-based, and the LPAC pencil-based assessments. For each of the CASP and LPAC tests, the CDE has created an at-a-glance graphic that shows the accessibility resources that are available for each of the assessments. We are using modified examples that give you an idea of what to find on these documents. It is important to note that the availability and categorization of a particular resource may vary from assessment to assessment. For example, a particular resource may be considered a universal tool on one assessment, but a designated support on another. These graphics are helpful tools to keep such distinctions clear. This document categorizes resources available to all students under the universal tools and designated support headings. The resources for students with IEPs or Section 504 plans as accommodations. The top two sections highlight the resources available to all students, with universal tools listed on the left and designated supports listed on the right. The bottom portions are specific to students with IEPs or 504 plans. The box in the bottom left lists accommodations available to those students, and the box in the bottom right describes the resources that are available to students taking the CA. For the LPAC assessment, the two boxes in the bottom right describes what unlisted resources and domain exemptions are. The categories for the accessibility resources are the same for all content areas, but specific resources available vary somewhat based on the content area. You may notice that within each section, there are subtests of resources called embedded and non-embedded. Embedded resources are those provided to students within the computer testing interface. Non-embedded resources are those that must be provided to students outside of the testing interface. Some resources may be things you have heard about or used in the instructional context, but not necessarily within the assessment. For example, you may have used masking in the classroom with a piece of cardstock. But what does it look like in the online assessment administration? The visual provided here shows the universal tools and designated supports for the English Language Arts and Literacy assessment that are available to all students. The universal tools are available to all students based on student preference and selection. There are embedded and non-embedded resources here. Please remember that embedded are within the computer system. Non-embedded are some that may need to be provided by the school site. Within some of the universal tools, we want you to recognize that within an LPAC assessment, breaks are provided within the domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. For the LPAC and CASP assessment, you will see that scratch paper is available, which can be plain or lined paper. However, we need to be aware that for the CASP math assessment for grade 6 and above, graph paper is required. Here are some designated supports. These are features that are available for the use by any student for whom the needs has been identified by an educator or team of educators. Here are some CASP embedded tools for students with designated supports and accommodations. Please note that we have provided you with resources for English and Spanish videos for both CASP and LPAC. This is the bottom portion of an accessibility graphic. You must have students with locked IEPs in order to assign them these accommodations. These accommodations need to be entered into the computer at least a week before testing begins. This slide shows some of the available accommodations. Please note that it's very important that your school site determines who is going to be entering these accommodations into the system. These accommodations change in procedures or materials that will increase equitable access during testing. These accommodations require an IEP or a locked 504 plan. Please consider some of these accommodation examples, such as alternate response options. There's Braille, closed captioning, print on demand, speech to text, or word prediction for CASP. In the event that you have any questions, please reach out to Assessment Services and we can support you to ensure that your students have what they need in order to take the assessment. For the LPAC, the IEP or Section 504 team may decide to exempt a student from a domain if there are no available resources or unlisted resources that provide the student access to that domain. Guidance on exemptions for the LPAC domain is as follows. For an overall score to be generated, students must be assessed with the LPAC in at least one domain or both of the oral and written language composites. In the event that an IEP team decides that it is necessary to exempt the student from 2 or more domains, the team should consider the use of an alternate assessment for the LPAC. However, please note that if you determine that an alternate assessment is required for LPAC, it will also need to be required for the CASP. Unlisted resources are not generally provided to students. However, in the event that you feel that it is necessary, please make sure you call the Director of Assessment Services. This is because requests must be submitted to the CDE at least 10 days prior to testing. The CDE must determine the unlisted resources can be provided, because this does change the construct of the assessment being measured. This slide shows the new CAST accessibility resources. They include text-to-speech, and there are some designated supports as well, which include read item only, which will read the construct response items as well. There is speech to text, which is an embedded accommodation. The computer will record what the student is saying. As you are making student-centered decisions, please remember that these accommodations, designated supports, are different based on the assessment. For example, print on demand is a designated support on LPAC. However, it is an accommodation on CASP. This means that the student must have an IEP in order to receive print on demand. Scribe and text-to-speech are considered accommodations on LPAC. but can be designated supports or accommodations on the CASP. Please use the matrices when making these decisions.
So now let's take a look at some practical applications for testing. There is often confusion surrounding embedded versus non-embedded supports. As an example, an embedded support, text-to-speech, the non-embedded version is for an educator to read aloud. An embedded speech-to-text would equate to a non-embedded scribe reading the items. If you intend to use a scribe or a test reader for read-alouds, please note that they must be an employee of San Diego Unified School District, have a signed security affidavit on file either in paper or in the TOM system, be familiar with the student and their method of communication, and should have scribed for the student previously. Must have reviewed and read the scribing protocol or guidelines for read aloud for either CASP or LPAC.
Now we will talk about the identification and collection of accessibility resources. We know that each school is unique and serves very different students. However, the process for identifying and addressing student needs to be equitable across our district. This means that we need to have consistent systems school-wide. We need to have equitable practices. We need to appropriately identify the students who need additional support. We need to use the effective tools that are available to us, and we need to monitor the implementation of these tools and resources. In order to select the accessibility resources that matches the student's need, teachers and students must become familiar with the available accessibility resources. They need to understand the functionality of the accessibility resources as well. Identifying resources for students. Each decision should be made based on each individual student and what they need to demonstrate their current learning. Remember, we want to know what the student knows, not how well they physically take an assessment. Assigning accessibility resources to students. First, we must identify our student needs. Match the needs to available supports. Use supports at the classroom level. Use interim assessments and practice tests to monitor what you have given to each of your students. You will then evaluate the effectiveness of those supports. You will finalize support selections. Enter these supports into TOMS and access summative assessments. Now that your team has identified and entered the appropriate supports for your students into TOMS, your next step is to use practice and training assessments to ensure their success. In addition, use these supports regularly during daily instruction and modify as necessary. Many school sites use the individual student assessment accessibility profile, such as called the ISAP. The ISAP tool is a macros-embedded Excel workbook that assists in assigning, collecting, and uploading test settings for a batch of students. The ISAP form is a document that assists in assigning, collecting, and entering test settings for one student at a time. Please know that when you batch upload, you wipe out any individual student assignments. So we encourage you to do batch uploading first and then adding any individual assignments after. Here is an example of what an ISAP form looks like. You can give them to teachers and have them work through them during PLC meetings, but please remember that these ISAP forms are available in the internal portal of Assessment Services.
After gathering your data for each child and what their needs are, you will need to enter that information into the Test Operation Management System, also known as TOMS. TOMS is the data warehouse used to set up test sessions and gather the data for your students. Other items that you will find in TOMS is you have the ability to review student data, assign designated supports and accommodations, submit unlisted resources, run eligibility reports, run completion reports, and add additional users for your site or test examiners. We do ask that you do not contact the Caltech office. The Assessment Services Office is your first point of contact. When entering designated supports and accommodation in TOMS, it is a school site function. Teachers are eligible to enter as well. Designated supports and accommodations must be entered a minimum of 48 hours prior to testing. If you log a student in and the designated support or accommodations are not showing, you must log the student off and wait an additional 24 hours and do not begin testing. There are two ways to enter designated supports and accommodations for students. One by one through the Student Profile tab, or batch uploading through the template or ISAP tool as previously discussed. When you are in the Test Operations system, you will select the Student tab in the blue menu bar, and from there you will select the Test Settings. As you scroll through Test Settings, the available options based on the student profile will be eligible to be selected. They should match items selected on the ISAP tool. And for our larger schools, it is possible that the batch upload process would be an easier function to utilize. You would again go to the Student tab, select Upload. You would select Download to get your template, complete all the information within the template, save the template. When you select Next, it gives you the option to upload. There are tips and tricks on uploading files. Please follow the online instructions included in the template or call the Assessment Services office or join any one of our open Zoom rooms. We are happy to help you configure your ISAP tool to ensure a smooth upload process. This screenshot demonstrates the second part of uploading when you go out and select the file that you have saved. Some additional TOMS reminders when working with accommodations and designations in the TOMS system. Only those staff with site testing coordinator access are authorized to enter designated supports and accommodations and unlisted resources into TOMS. Accommodations and unlisted resources can only be uploaded and assigned to students that are reflected in CalPads and the student system as a yes on the demographic screen in TOMS. If you are having difficulty uploading for a student, please review their demographics to ensure their setting is to yes for both of these fields. As a test examiner, when you set up your test session, prior to approving a student for testing, you should review their accommodations and settings to make sure that they are appropriate for the student requesting access to assess. If not, please exit the test system and make sure through your test coordinator that the accommodations are appropriately entered into TOMS. Wait 24 hours before trying to assess the student again. In the test session, when you have set up the test, the second window, when you select the I, will show you that the settings that you have chosen for your student. If a student's test settings are incorrect, again, please notify your site testing coordinator for the correction and re-administer the test or re-access the test session 24 hours later. Thank you. In the rare instance that you would have an approved, CDE approved, unlisted resource available to you in TOMS, again, you have to have 10-day prior approval from the CDE. You must contact the Assessment Services Director, Erica Simmons, and once that occurs, that resource will be available within TOMS. A very helpful tool to ensure that your test settings are accurate is to run your school level test setting report. This can be found in the blue menu bar under Reports, and again scrolling down to the school level student test settings report. This will tell you what support and accommodations have been entered for the students at your school site. Again, only run an unlisted resource report in the event that you have actually entered one. This report should be a very rare occurrence at any school site.
So let's put this all together. Our goal is to ensure that all students have an equal opportunity to demonstrate what they know and what they can do. This is done by understanding your students' learning characteristics, by providing them the accessibility needs, ensuring the accessibility resources, and then having an accurate measure of what the student knows and what they can do, resulting in an accurate reflection of the student's knowledge, skills, and ability. In the event that you need paper copies, you will see here that there are LPAC guides and CAS guides. You can find these at lpac.org as well as casp.org. This is a demonstration video of an embedded accessibility resource, such as masking, for the California assessments. There are many more demonstration videos that educators, parents, and students can view in both English and Spanish. For a complete list of demonstration videos and other resources, visit the demonstration videos link provided in the Padlet. We hope that this presentation has provided answers to all of your questions. However, if you need additional support, please contact the Assessment Services Department.